To make the legs for this table, I'm going to use this 4x4 Douglas fir post, and I'm going to cut these legs with a 5-degree miter. So I'm first going to cut this end off so that I have the 5-degree angle on this end. And then I want the legs to be 18 inches long from this angle here. So I'll measure 18 inches down this way and then make another cut the same angle. So next we're going to take a 2x4 and we're going to cut the same 5-degree miter angle on one end, flip it over, and then cut the same angle on the other end at 23 inches long. So now we have two identical boards here. They're 23 inches long from this end to this end, and this is a 5-degree angle sloping inward on all the angles. So we're going to cut a half lap in the middle of these so they can overlap and form a 90-degree angle. So we want the shorter end on both of these facing up. And then we can find the middle on the top piece here and on the bottom piece here. So I'm going to flip this over and then measure to find the middle of each of these pieces. So the middle on this piece was 11.5 inches. The middle on this piece was 11.25 inches. So if we line these two lines up together, then we can take a scrap piece of 2x4 and leave it just to where you can see a little bit of the line. Then square it up and you'll just guess where this will be in the center. So I feel like that's really close. So now I'm going to mark this on both sides. All of this area is what I will want to cut out for the half lap joint so that these boards can overlap. I'm going to cut these out using the depth gauge on my miter saw. Now to set the depth, we want to once again take a scrap 2x4 and just measure halfway up. So this 2x4 is 3.5 inches or 90 millimeters. So I know halfway will be 45 millimeters. So if I mark that, this is the depth that I want the miter saw to cut. So to do that, I'm just going to set this board in place and then use the depth stop on the saw to measure down where the blade will be. Now, whenever you do this, make sure the saw is unplugged. You do not want your hands around here or to expose the blade and then go down when the saw is plugged in. So this saw is unplugged, so I can safely line the blade up with this to judge the depth. So from there, it looks like the blade needs to come down just a little bit. So I'm going to adjust the depth gauge and then try to line that up again. All right, so that's about perfect. Now the blade is obviously curved upwards. So I'm gonna have to cut this and then flip the board around and then get the back, and then I'll clean the middle out with the chisel. So I have this lined up where I wanna make the cut. Now this board's a little bit short and I don't wanna awkwardly put my hand in here close to the blade. So I'm gonna use a clamp on this side and this side. Definitely use clamps on this. You don't want your hands anywhere near the blade. All right, so this board is clamped secure in two places, and now I can go ahead and make the first cut. Now I can just slide the board over, reclamp until I have several of these cuts made, and then can break out the middle pieces. So the first part of this cut's done. Now I need to flip the board around the other way because the blade curves upward, and then I can clean the middle out with a file. So this is what I'm left with. I'm going to clean all these pieces up with a chisel and then use a file in the middle to even that out. So these are cleaned up good enough, and this is what I'm left with. So this angle goes up where this angle goes down. So if I flip this over, I can overlap the two, and all of the angles on the sides go up. So this is the basic layout of the legs. So the legs are angled inward, which matches up with this cut here. The other board will join with a half flap going this way. So there will be another leg up here and another leg down there. Now to join these, I'm going to use dowels, and I'm actually going to use my doweling jig to make a doweling jig that will let me drill holes here and also here. So to make the doweling jig, I need a scrap 2x4 and my actual doweling jig. So I'm going to use a 1/4 inch brad point bit, which lines up right here. So I'm going to put this on the board. So this hole is kind of a third of the way or so in on the 2x4. It really doesn't matter where, just as long as it's not too close to the center or too close to the end. And then you can drill the first hole. Then you simply take the doweling jig off, flip the board around, and then we're going to put another hole on this side using the same 1/4 inch bushing on the doweling jig. So this is what the board will look like. And so I measured previously with how far down the drill bit goes, but these will go down about 1 1/8 of an inch. So I'm going to cut this board off with the miter saw close to 1 1/8 inches. So now on this piece that I cut off, I have the holes on both sides. So to use the jig that we just made, you want to pair all the legs up. So these legs will be facing each other. Those legs will be facing each other. These will be the inside. The same thing here. So this side and this side will be the inside. So we want to rotate each of the boards where the inside piece will be facing upward. And if this is done properly, all of the bottom angles will be facing the same way. So this is a flat surface. So take a straight edge and make sure that all of these are lined up. Then you can take a square and mark a line all the way across to these just in the center. So this is about 6 inches up from the bottom. So now to use this jig that we made, you want to take one of these and prop it up with the other boards. Then place this right to where it's flush with the line that we made. So square and center that up, and then this can be clamped down. And now we can drill down into these holes with the same brad point bit. So these holes will match up with these holes, and if I repeat the process on all of the legs, then these holes will all end up in the exact same position. But when you do this, one thing that you want to remember is to keep this jig facing the same way at all times. So I'm going to draw a little up arrow, and that lets me know it needs to be positioned on the next leg facing up rather than upside down or backwards. So now I can repeat the process on the other 3 legs. So now 4 legs are good with the holes that should be identical on each piece. The apron will set like this. Where we use this, the dowels went straight up and down. And if I clamp this same piece to this end and then drill in this way, these dowels will also be going straight up and down. So I'm going to clamp this piece onto the apron in similar fashion to how I did with the leg. And then we will drill right down into that again. So I'm going to keep the arrow that's facing up, actually facing up. And now these holes will match the holes on the leg exactly. So I'm going to repeat on this end and then do the other piece of the apron, and then we'll be ready to assemble these. So I'm going to use these 1/4 inch poplar dowels that I cut, put these in the legs, and then put the apron on. Okay, so now I have 2 of these pieces with the legs and the apron attached. I'm going to put glue on the half lap joint, put the other one on top, and then I'm going to clamp everything together until it's dry. So here's the base glued and clamped up. The clamps are off, and this is what the frame looks like. Everything glued up really nicely. I'm going to go ahead and sand everything down, get the logos out of the center, and sand the sides of the legs down nicely. Would have been easier to do this before I assembled everything, but I didn't do that, so I'll go ahead and sand it down. So for the top, I'm just going to use this round project panel. This is 36 inches in diameter. I could have made one of these and it would have been cheaper, but this is already together, cut, and ready to go. So it's way quicker. I'm going to trim this with a round over bit just to give it some detail on the edge. So now there's a nice edge on this that makes it look really cool. I'm going to sand the top of this with 220 to get the sharp edge off of there and take out any scuffs or lines on top of this. To attach the top, I'm going to use figure 8 fasteners, one on each leg, and I'm going to put the grain of the tabletop running in this direction. So I want this fastener in the middle to face this way so it can pivot left or right. But then on the side legs, if I put this fastener here, it won't allow the wood to move this way. So that'll actually restrict wood movement. So I need to put it on this side, and then I'm going to offset it the same way on the leg, only on this side, so that these can pivot this way whenever the wood moves. So I'm going to drill these with a Forstner bit, so the clamp here will help this from splitting when I drill down into the leg. So now we can set the top back on. So to get this centered before we attach this, we need to measure equal spacing at all of these gaps right here. So if this gap right here is equal on all the legs, then we'll know that the top is perfectly centered. So somewhere between 95 and 100 millimeters on each of the gaps is center. So anywhere in that range will be close enough to where any offset will never be seen. So now I'm going to attach the tabletop to the legs using the figure 8 fasteners from earlier. And you should be able to get these on without having to clamp anything down. So when I'm putting this screw in, I'm actually pushing down on the tabletop here, give it a little bit of pressure so there's no gaps there. So I'm going to stain this with black gel stain. Should give it a solid black collar, but still be able to see the grain through. And I'm going to stain the bottom of this first to make sure that I like the collar and how the stain takes. So everything is completely stained now. If you go with the grain, everything will set really nice. Now this is a little bit heavier than on what I want, and I actually want to try to expose some of the grain. So I'm going to take a clean rag and try to wipe some of the stain back out. Now the table will stay the color that it is, but you'll be able to see a little bit of the grain when I do that. So that's exactly what I'm looking for with the grain showing through on the top. Here's a close-up of what it looks like. I'm going to go ahead and do that with the rest of the table. So I'm going to wipe down all the legs and the inside braces too. Now that the stain's dry, I'm going to take a file and distress the legs going over some of the edges. The last step is to clear coat this. I'm using polycrylic clear matte because I want a dull finish. So I'm going to apply this and then the table will be finished. Here's the finished product. I think this turned out great. The gel stain and distress give this table a ton of character. I really enjoyed this build overall, especially since it didn't require a lot of materials. Thanks for watching and let me know what you think in the comments section. Don't forget to subscribe for more upcoming videos.